I'm with Richard Leider. He is a best-selling author, lecturer, life coach, and his work is so fascinating. We're diving deep into some of his concepts. Now, Richard, I've often talked about my dad with you in the past, and he used to say, you need a sounding board.
Really?
And I really didn't understand at the time what he was talking about, but you talk about sounding boards.
I do.
What is your definition?
Well, a sounding board is like your kitchen cabinet or your people you sit around the fire with, but these are your go-to people. The concept is very simple. Isolation is fatal. I can't say it enough because I hear it so often from so many people that they feel alone. And every human being wants somebody who gets them. More than one person, but they want somebody who gets them and recognizes and they can have a voice with. And a sounding board is not a fix-it group necessarily. They're a group that you can open up with and be transparent with in a lot of ways. When I do a sounding board exercise, and I'll talk a little bit about the characteristics, but it's very interesting because there's a gender bias here. Women often have sounding boards, men don't. And if I get men to, which I do in coaching, I won't coach someone unless they have a sounding board, because I don't want them dependent on me as their coach, as their sounding board. I'm part of it. I'm a de facto member of their sounding board. But when they leave, and if it's just me, it's not gonna work, because they're not gonna be with me forever. So oftentimes men will automatically pick a spouse or a female partner that's close. Women almost never pick their husband or partner. Now,
Well,
why
that's
do you think that
interesting.
is? Isn't that interesting?
I wonder if they don't listen.
I think that's part
I'm
of it.
not saying everyone, but
Yeah, there's that. There's a lot of, gender stuff around, telling, don't tell me, just listen. And I think a lot of that's true. But I think in many ways that we don't value it because we're taught to be independent and, to do it on, it's weak. Don't ask your competitors or ask other people, you do it on your own. So there's a lot of things around that. But the benefit of a sounding board is basically to de-stress, to take the stress out. It's interesting, most of the time people think a sounding board is advice.
right.
That's not what it is at all. A sounding board is a place for you to, to de-stress, to be able to be yourself, to be able to talk transparently with someone else. The Canadian doctor, Dr. Hans Selye, who coined the term stress publicly many years ago, he was actually not researching stress as we know it as negative. He was researching what's called eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S, eustress. Eustress is positive stress. What is there that you want that will energize you? Other people have called it being in the flow or things like that. So a sounding board helps you with eustress, helps you get what you want, helps you clarify what you want in certain ways. And it's often de-stress or takes the stress out when you can talk to somebody about it. If feelings buried alive live. If you keep them inside for too long, they kill you. I mean, they eat you up literally, or they work on you in certain ways. And so a lot of people are kind of like walking time bombs because they don't have anybody to share it with. They got stress at work and they take it home, they keep it inside for a variety of reasons. So a sounding board helps you to de-stress or bring it out and open it up in certain ways.
Are there triggers in one's life that present themselves that are obvious sounding board fodder, as it were?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's typically when we go for a sounding board is during a trigger. Job loss, you got cancer, economic, relational. I mean, if you go to any coffee shop and listen to what's being talked about on either side of you, It's either work or relationships that stress. And often those stresses are, why are they sitting there in the coffee shop? Well, it's kind of like a little sounding board type of thing. It's a place to talk, and different places are set up for that. So there are certain roles and certain characteristics on sounding boards. One of my sounding board people is a guy named Dr. Roland Larson, who's in his mid-90s now. He's failing and he's kind of frail, but he was and is the most profoundly gifted listener. And he used to have a bumper sticker that said, "Listen to someone today." That was he was actually a psychologist, that's how we met. And we were kind of sounding boards, committed listeners for each other. And we still are, but it's changed. But anytime I had a trigger, back to your question, above and beyond anybody, I would immediately call Raleigh. He was my go-to committed listener because I knew that I would be able to talk it out. And if I wanted advice, I'd ask for it. But he wouldn't give it to me unless I asked. That's how gifted he was. He said, he would say, well, do you want some feedback or do you just want to talk? And so part of that is it's as simple as that. It's just having a committed listener. So a sounding board can be just one person, but it can also be more than one, because why do boards of directors have diversity? It's for multiple perspectives. So you might want to have different perspectives on your sounding board. Some people on our sounding board are deceased.
Explain that.
Well, like, for example, my father, who died 24 months after retiring. And I esteemed him for his he was more but he was sounding board. I'd say, I wonder what question he'd ask me. I wonder what he'd be thinking about this. Or it could be a religious figure. So you can, kind of invoke somebody else's perspective or their point of view. People talk a lot about their grandparents or their parents or spiritual or religious figures, and they offer that perspective, but they also offer, I prefer a sounding board that's alive, that you can talk to, but it can work that way as well.
Where do you find members of your sounding board?
Ask.
Do they have to be close friends?
No. They can be strangers, actually. I don't mean off the street strangers, but they can be people that don't know you that well. Where you say, I'd like to meet on a regular basis and just chat. Because I always get that question, what if you don't have a sounding board? I said, well, ask somebody. And they said, well, why would they want to do it? If I asked you to be on my sounding board,
I'd be flattered.
You'd be flattered. And that's the way it is most people are. It gives them a sense of dignity. Well, why did you pick me? Because you're such a good listener and I really respect your perspective on things, and it's all of a sudden, so don't be surprised if they then ask you,
Absolutely.
Go the other way where you're both on each other's sounding board.
Sure.
It doesn't have to work that way though. So sometimes, there's committed listeners, there's catalysts who inspire us, there's wise elders or people who are at least have a broader perspective, and then there are younger people. And to be honest with you, this is going to sound a little weird because it's not literally on your sounding board, but I get it in every single seminar. And I don't mean occasional, I mean all the time. People will say, what about my pet? And I'm not kidding. People love their pets so much.
Absolutely.
They talk to their pets know their problems. It's not literally that they're on their sounding board, but pets increasingly, with particularly older adults,
Absolutely.
they keep them alive, they talk to them. There's something called the Eden Alternative that was created by a friend and a colleague of mine named Dr. Bill Thomas, who's one of the preeminent geriatricians in the world. He created the Eden Alternative, and his purpose, by the way, or maybe it's his goal is to eradicate all nursing homes on Earth and replace them with the Eden Alternative. And what is the Eden Alternative? The Eden Alternative is a place for older adults who have got some infirmities, usually dementia of some sort or another. First thing they do is they put in a daycare center. Next, they put in horticulture, gardens, and nature. Next, they bring in pets, and he's done a lot to get past the codes in different states to do this. So what is common to kids, horticulture, and pets? They all need some kind of nurturing, and they all give back something. And it's very interesting that it's not exactly like a sounding board, but the point is that we all need that ability to connect and get back in certain ways, nurture and be nurtured in certain ways. And they do way better when they have to get up in the morning and feed a cat or read to a kid or water a plant than the other people who don't have to do that and everything's taken care of. So part of a sounding board is nurturing. You get nurturing. That's hard to talk about with people, but it is, for someone to get you, it doesn't have to be, kumbaya type. It can just be, I just respect you so much. I want to hear more about what it is you're talking about. That respect thing is a big, big part of sounding board.
Oh, I'm sure it is. And trust.
And trust,
Yes.
exactly.
Right.
Transparency, the more transparent, the more we trust that, but we have to earn the right. You have to earn the right by trying it and by testing it out over time.
I want to circle back to
Yeah.
something you said about members of the sounding board. You mentioned younger people.
Yes.
And for some of our older friends, they may scratch their head at that and say,
Yeah.
what would a younger person be able to give me?
Yeah. Well, there's aliveness. There's curiosity, opening you up to new things that they're interested in rather than just writing them off that it could be music, it could be art, it could be new learnings. I love the idea, and I'm seeing more and more of a mutual mentoring or mutual sounding boards where you're on each other's sounding boards. In the past, typically it was older mentors and younger recipients. I think now it's not just technology, getting mentoring from young people. Like my grandkids know more about technology than I do. They're not what I'm talking about with mentoring. And the point is younger people can help you with certain things. But in terms of being in a real conversation, I find that oftentimes that people are starved for how to connect with younger people. They don't want to live with just people who are like them, their age, et cetera. And they don't want to just be taking care of them and, in other words, just mentoring one way. They want to go, one of the things we discovered was this. Older people don't like the term lifelong learning.
Really?
Yeah. Why? Lifelong means I'm going to only be in class with people like me, my age. Now, that's okay in certain instances, but they want to go to a class where there's younger people, and there's different ideas, and there's things like that. They want to, why? There are people moving into these condominiums on the edges of college campuses now. It's a big movement going on, and colleges, what do they get? Well, they get to go with younger people to music and sports and classes and everything like this. And there's some philanthropy probably that happens, where they might give to that. And the younger people get the benefit of having older people around and living in a real community. The hunter-gatherers that I've talked about and talk about so often, the Hadza hunter-gatherers, they live in community. They don't live in enclaves like this. They live in an intergenerational world. And in fact, there's even something, one of the reasons they say they've survived all these years, they call it the grandmother theory, that living in an intergenerational world where it isn't just the nuclear parents taking care of the kid, that the whole community takes care of the kid, they tend to thrive. They tend to live longer, have lower infant mortality rates, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think this community thing, the hunger for community is kind of an overlay on sounding board in many ways.
As you connect.
If you think of sounding board as community rather than a fix-it type of thing, I think that's what the hunger is for. People want community. They want to be connected with people, not just in activities or housing or you find in communities today that a lot of people feel isolated, even though they might live right next door to each other. They don't even know their neighbor.
Right.
And so I think that as we get older, there's a little fear in being alone. There's a little fear, and it's not just safety and security, but if you're not working all the time or you're doing different things, how do you make that connection? Well, a sounding board is the way to do that.
But I'm loving this.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you, and the
Yeah.
mutual mentoring
Yeah.
is really intriguing to me.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out for my own self, how do I open that door with somebody?
Yeah, just ask. I don't know if you're in a book club or where you would go to meet other people because you work and you're married and you've got other activities, but is there anybody you can think of that would be, you just say, for 30 days, let's be a sounding board for each other and see what wants to happen. It could be, oftentimes it happens in book clubs or in church Bible studies or in other kinds of groups where people would say, I'd really like to talk more. That was a great idea. Would you mind having coffee with me? You don't have to broach the subject of, will you be my sounding board, but just check out to see what kind of resonance there is. So sometimes we meet our sounding board members in organizations or in avocations where we have mutual interests. And then we find somebody we kind of trust enough to say, yeah, I'd like to have a drink with you or a cup of coffee or something like that, and then just see what wants to happen. But act rather than reflect on it forever. Just check it out for a short period of time, 30 days. Let's meet once a week or every other week for a month, and just be fun to talk about our lives or something like that.
Do sounding board members, Richard, go in and out of your life? Is it kind of a fresh cycle, as it were?
Yeah, if you get down to the real I would say practical sounding board, oftentimes like people going through a job transition, need a sounding board with people who really get what they're up to, and maybe those people are just on that sounding board for 6 months or a year or a period of time where they can give them feedback on the job hunt or on themselves and their skills, their gifts and talents, their calling cards type of things. So sometimes and then we deselect, or we don't fire them. That's not a good term, but we just say, thanks, that was great, and on to. A lot of times, sounding boards are in spiritual groups. People who are spiritual seekers, and I'll use this in the broadest sense. Doesn't mean religious. It could be religious, but who want to kind of look at the spiritual side of life, and it's hard they look for other places. Other people that they can talk about these places, talk about these things with. So you see a lot of sounding board type things happen where they can have that conversation. They can have that courageous conversation without feeling like this person's going to be offended, or, why are you thinking about that deep stuff, why don't you just enjoy your life? So often people can only go this far. With sounding boards, we look for people who can go that far, farther than, or as far as you want. So you look for some shared values or some shared seeking interests in certain ways.
How many people on your sounding board?
Well, it's the one I talked about.
Yes.
Yeah. Another one is a wise younger, who's my son, Andrew. My wife is on that. My wife Sally's on my sounding board, and we talk about these things, and we have kind of a code for when we're talking. And so everything's not a sounding board conversation. So we use the term request. When I say, I have a request. A request means I really want you to listen. So it's code for, this isn't just a drive-by conversation. She knows what that means, I know what that means. That means you're busy. And so I might counteroffer and say, I got the fact you want to talk, I can't do it right now, could we do it here? So, but think of the dignity in that, rather than just saying, well, I don't have time to do that right now, or doing a cursory listen. When I say I have a request, or she says to me I have a request, it means I commit to talking, or I decline for some reason, or I counteroffer and say I'll do it at another time. But the dignity of listening is so deep in our members, the hunger for that. That's really the core of a sounding board. No matter what roles you put, if they don't have the willingness to stop, often take 3 deep breaths perhaps, but that's another practice, and listen. With my son, who's in his mid-40s, so he's 25 years younger or whatever, 30 years younger, we are mutual sounding board members. We check in with each other all the time. And it's fun and we like it. And sometimes it's at a baseball game. But we say, I need a sounding board, and we know exactly what that means. We may be having fun while we're doing it. So it doesn't have to be that we have to be like, okay, now we're going to get really serious. But we need to be able to make a clear request if we want a sounding board.
I'm so excited by this. I'm going to try it. And I might have to call you up and ask you to be on my sounding board.
Anytime.
Thinking about questions here. Are there certain questions you should ask your sounding board?
There's no real formula for this. There's no real questions. I mean, I frame it in the concept of a request. In other words, here's what I'm thinking about, for example. So it could be, let's go back to your trigger. It could be a trigger. I could be feeling like I'm in limbo. Limbo is that period where something's ending, like a divorce or a job or a health problem. Something else is beginning, but I'm kind of in the middle. I want to feel 2 things. Number one, I want to feel support, because when you're in limbo, there's a yucky feeling. It feels like you're the only one and you feel alone and maybe even screwed up, like how come I'm no one else, just me, really alone in certain ways. So part of what you're asking for is just be there for me. A very hard request to make, but I really need someone to be there.
Or check me out.
Or check me out. Or it's like going to a personal trainer. I'm trying to do this. Can we check in on a regular basis and see how I'm doing, even though you're not my, paid trainer or coach? Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, what are some practices that might help me? Or do you know of anybody who's been through a situation like this? Oftentimes, in a trigger, you pick somebody else who's been through, you're going through a divorce, you pick somebody else who's been through a divorce to figure out, well, what did they do? How did they survive this? What would you, and so we're only as good as our practices. So what a sounding board can provide, most of all, is not the questions. It's the ear. It's the third ear. It's the listening. And then the other thing is practices. What kinds of things worked for you? And that's when it gets a little dicey, because what works, everybody's an experiment of one. What might work for you might not work for me, and vice versa. But we tend to trust people who've had the same triggers we've had in certain ways. That's why 12-step programs work so well, and then other kinds of programs, because those are like sounding boards, literally, but they're more broadly based.
Oh, exciting concept. My dad was right about sounding boards.
He was.
He was. Richard, always a pleasure. Thank you.